This nondescript building in a residential area of Rotterdam, Netherlands is hiding a big secret. Or at least it was until September, when Safeguard Defenders, a human rights organization, revealed the building's true purpose. See, the building is actually a police station, but not one with ordinary Dutch police. No, this police station was secretly run by the government of Fuzhou County, China. So what exactly is a local Chinese police station doing in the Netherlands? Well, the Chinese government's official answer is that the stations are used to help Chinese living abroad obtain driver's licenses and other government services. But Safeguard Defenders report reveals something much more complex and sinister. After diving into publicly available documents from Chinese provincial and local governments, government announcements and press conferences, the organization identified revealed at least 54 separate police stations. According to the documents analyzed by the organization, overseas police stations are used to track Chinese citizens committing fraud in foreign countries. In fact, the Chinese government has identified 9 fraud-related countries and is now forbidding its citizens from visiting them. These include Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Thailand, Turkey, and the UAE. In these forbidden countries, these overseas police stations are being used to ensure any Chinese already living in these countries return to China immediately. But the first crack in this official explanation is that the network of overseas police stations goes far beyond these 9 countries. They are actually present in at least 30 different countries. But the thing is, even if you're a country, you can't just set up a police station outside of your own borders. Even setting up a building like an embassy or a new consulate requires approval from the host country's government. So how is this even possible? Well, before I answer that, I quickly want to thank the sponsor of this video, Masterworks. In 2022, you can't have all your eggs in one basket, especially as Goldman Sachs just warned the bear market is far from over. And with inflation taking record amounts of money straight from your bank account, people are scrambling for options. Because a groundbreaking McKinsey study found that institutions invest 30 to 50% of their assets into alternatives outside of stocks, and B of A's CIO recommends investing in one specific high-performing alternative to rescue your cash: fine art. It sounds unusual, but after the record-breaking Paul Allen auction last month, CNBC suggested that the ultra-rich may view fine art as a safer store of wealth than even stocks. But it's not just the ultra-rich profiting off art in 2022. Masterworks investors have been too. Their paintings are SEC qualified, broken into shares, then resold. When resold, potential profits are redistributed to Masterworks investors, and just last month, Masterworks handed back a 17.8% net return, their 5th sale this year alone. In fact, Masterworks' last 3 sales have delivered 17, 21, and 33% net returns. With nearly 600,000 members, Masterworks has been offering a new painting every week, and shares have sold out in minutes in the past. But you can get priority access to their offerings by clicking the link in the description. Alright, so how is this possible? I mean, in Canada, for example, a foreign government has to send an official request to the Canadian government with a detailed justification of the need before opening a new embassy or even hiring new diplomatic staff. And according to international law, opening a new building like a consulate or even a new job position at an embassy can happen only with the consent of the receiving state. So this doesn't add up. See, a core principle of international law is the idea of sovereignty, which essentially means that countries respect each other's borders and don't interfere with what happens in foreign territory. So when it was revealed that China was secretly operating police stations in countries like the Netherlands, Germany, and Ireland, these countries' respective governments were understandably pretty pissed that their sovereignty was being undermined. The Dutch and Canadian governments have called the police stations illegal, and 14 countries are now investigating the situation. The Irish government has already ordered the stations to be closed. But the thing is, China has never really been 100% behind the idea of sovereignty anyway. For centuries, China's relationship with neighboring countries was not one of equals, but a hierarchy with China's emperor at the top of everything under heaven. Now that China is once again a powerful country on a global level, it can impose its will on smaller countries. We can see this with the way it has built military bases in the South China Sea, or even in important new Chinese laws which apply not only to China's borders or to its own citizens, but to the entire world. This is also the case for the national security law passed in 2020 to quash the protests in Hong Kong. While the overseas police stations are the creation of individual Chinese provinces and not China's national government, they reflect the national government's apparent desire for extraterritoriality or control beyond its borders, especially when it comes to Chinese citizens. And while the official documents focus on fraud prevention, there's a pretty good reason why that isn't enough to explain the true reason behind the secret police stations. See, when a criminal escapes one one country and goes to another, if the two countries have an extradition agreement, the criminal can be sent back to their home country for trial. And according to China's state-owned newspaper, The Global Times, China has extradition treaties with 59 countries. But generally speaking, the offense must be considered a crime in both countries for the extradition to be approved. Not to mention, a suspect in a European country would have the right to a fair trial to prove their innocence before being extradited to China. And the reason that's a problem is that Chinese citizens who speak out against their government aren't breaking any laws in Western countries, which is where these hidden police stations abroad come into play. The officer stations abroad can put pressure on Chinese dissidents to try and convince them to return home, and they have a few main tactics to make this happen. The first way is to intimidate, threaten, or even imprison their family in China to convince the dissidents to give in to their demands. If that isn't enough, they can send agents to threaten or harass the dissident in person. Finally, while the tactic hasn't been used in overseas police stations, other overseas crime-stopping operations have included kidnapping Chinese citizens abroad to return them to China against their will. So why is China so obsessed with controlling its citizens even when they're not even on its own territory? Well, since 1949, the Chinese Communist Party has had a complete monopoly on political control of the country. That means that unlike the US's two-party system or Europe's multi-party democracies, China is a one-party state, and anyone who questions the Communist Party's rule or its legitimacy is therefore a threat to the system. The Chinese government strictly controls the internet, requiring domestic websites to censor users and blocking access to foreign news and social media with what has been dubbed the Great Firewall. This gives the government a monopoly on information and means that while nearly 1 billion Chinese citizens are online, their only experience is unrecognizable to most of us outside China. Instead of Google, they use Baidu. Instead of Twitter, they have Weibo. But there's one app that is hard to compare to anything popular in other parts of the world: WeChat. On the surface, it seems like a messaging app similar to WhatsApp, but in China, WeChat is practically a necessity for daily life. Walk out of your home and you can pay for the bus or unlock a rideshare bike with a WeChat mini app. Feeling hungry? Even a tiny food stall probably has a QR code for WeChat Pay, since over 100 million small businesses in China use QR code payments. And if you want to catch up on the news, you can do that on WeChat too. In fact, WeChat may even have a misinformation problem worse than Facebook, except anything overly critical of the government is quickly censored. With such a convenient app, it's no surprise that WeChat is a lifeline for Chinese living abroad to stay in touch with their families, especially the nearly 700,000 Chinese students studying abroad every year. But there's a dark side to this cleverly convenient app. Since the app has to comply with Chinese law, it can be used by the Chinese government to track the activities of its citizens abroad and who exactly they're talking to. But even without government surveillance, the app has been a powerful tool used by Chinese student groups to organize against what they perceive as anti-Chinese interests. At one Canadian university, a group of Chinese students contacted the Chinese embassy to warn about an upcoming talk at the university, who is part of the Uyghur minority. The students were reportedly told to record the event to see who attended and to learn who organized the event. But even without direct government involvement, many Chinese students take it upon themselves to police the speech of other Chinese students who say anything critical about their government or its policies. According to a Human Rights Watch report, many Chinese students studying on campuses in liberal democracies like Australia, Canada, and the United States have to censor themselves to avoid being reported to their government. Those who have spoken publicly on sensitive issues like Taiwan, Tibet, or Tiananmen Square reported getting menacing calls from government agents or even calls from family begging them to stop. But China is far from the world's only dictatorship, so why does it go to such lengths to keep tabs on its citizens abroad? Well, it might not surprise you at this point to learn it's because of history. See, China was ruled by emperors for over 2,000 years. But in 1911, the long line of emperors dating back to literally the same time period as ancient Rome suddenly came to an end. And this was partly thanks to a man named Sun Yat-sen, who formed alliances with major figures in overseas Chinese communities to support and bankroll attempts to start a revolution in China. After the successful 1911 revolution, Sun Yat-sen became the first president of the Republic of China, and therefore the first non-emperor to rule over the country. The example of Sun Yat-sen shows the worst nightmare of the Communist Party: Chinese communities abroad organizing against it and raising money to finance its downfall. So now that we understand this context, the role of the overseas police stations start to make a lot more sense. As most dissidents haven't broken any local laws, they can't be extradited and foreign police stations can't be involved. For Chinese living abroad who oppose their government, the stations are a tool to exert control over them. To give an example of what this looks like in practice, take the example of Wang Jingyu, a Chinese dissident living in asylum in the Netherlands. Wang told the magazine Der Spiegel that he was harassed with calls from a number associated with an overseas police station. The man who called him reportedly tried convincing him to return to China, and after he refused, Wang was framed for a bomb threat. While the tactic of fabricating crimes seems limited to Wang's experience, China has plenty of other methods to convince people to return, like threatening their families. In fact, over the past year or so, over 230,000 Chinese have been persuaded to return by their government. But in any case, after all the bad press they've caused, it seems like the overseas police stations won't be sticking around for much longer, at least in Western countries. So we'll have to see what new tactics the Chinese government takes to maintain control over even the most defiant of its citizens. But that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.